I feel like stand-up comedy is one of the most stressful topics to discuss with other people, especially online. Because truly it is one of the most subjective art forms there is. What I personally find funny might be very different from what you find funny based on your own cultural or life experience. And as we grow and evolve as human beings, our taste in humor might also evolve. So it's no surprise that when it comes to the conversation about stand-up comedy online, especially on the hellscape known as twitter.com or x.com, that all the nuance needed for a discussion like this often goes out the window and particular stand-up comedians get politicized. And for the sake of avoiding a minefield here, we're not talking about Chappelle today. That's its own video. People who are way smarter and more qualified than me on Chappelle's rhetoric can talk about Chappelle. Go listen to them. No, what I, as a white woman from suburbia who went to a liberal arts college in New England, want to talk about today is the idolization and politicization of white male comedians. What it means, why it happens, and why it gets so many people riled up on both sides of the political aisle. Before we get started, feel free to follow me on all of the social media linked in this beautiful link tree down below. I also have a Patreon where you can subscribe for just $2 a month for bonus exclusive weekly content. And if you haven't seen one of my videos before, I have all of these lovely videos here that you can check out. Thanks so much. Okay, so I have been inspired by various news stories over the last year or so to go ahead and make this video, and I always found one reason or another to avoid it, but the story that finally decided to make me go through with it was the Shane Gillis SNL drama. If you're unfamiliar, Shane Gillis is a relatively popular comedian. He has two pretty well-known comedy specials, and he also hosts a podcast, and he was supposed to be brought on to Saturday Night Live as a cast member in 2019. But then a clip from his podcast surfaced in which he appeared to do a mocking version of a Chinese accent and use a slur for Chinese people.
Damn, Chinatown's fucking nuts.
It's crazy, dude.
It is full fucking China. Dude, it's fucking Chinese down there.
I wonder how that started. They just built one fucked up looking building and people were like, all right, no one said anything.
Let the fucking chinks live there, huh?
How can there be so many fucking restaurants down here?
All restaurants. Well, because
you go in, there's like one person eating ever.
Fat white idiots like me are down there sucking down neuters.
I hate China. I hate the food at Chinatown. Sucks. Chinese food's a very dishonest cuisine.
The story picked up a lot of steam online, and other comments surfaced in which Gillis made homophobic jokes. He then made a statement in which he apologized for those comments.
I'm a comedian who pushes boundaries. I sometimes miss. If you go through my 10 years of comedy, most of it bad, you're going to find a lot of bad misses, he wrote. I'm happy to apologize to anyone who's actually offended by anything I've said. My intention is never to hurt anyone, but I am trying to be the best comedian I can be, and sometimes that requires risks.
Ultimately, SNL made the decision to part ways with Shane Gillis before he officially joined the cast. They claimed that they were not aware of his racist and homophobic remarks before he was cast on the show. They were just impressed by his audition. And in 2021, Gillis went on the Joe Rogan Experience, claiming that Lorne Michaels was actually fine with all of this, but that the network that SNL airs on was not. And that was ultimately the reason for his firing. But then this week, Shane Gillis ended up hosting SNL. And that has reignited a debate surrounding stand-up comedy, whether or not Shane Gillis is secretly a champion of the anti-woke mob. And you know, these are just the totally normal, not brain-dead conversations that we need to have now. Now, to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make here, I'm going to break down my experience that I had as this story unfolded. I have seen Shane Gillis' stand-up comedy before, and I thought he was pretty funny. He reads to me as just a very middle-of-the-road, normal guy who likes making jokes. And so when all of this resurfaced after it was announced that he was hosting SNL, I was like, oh, that sucks, he made a shitty racist joke. I feel like that's a pretty normal thought process to have with something like this, but it was interesting watching all of the internet somehow rush to claim Shane Gillis as their guy. In particular, it was wild watching members of the right fight to make him the next member of the canceled by the woke mob narrative, in part because I feel like they so badly want a normal dude who they can point to and go, look, he's just a normal dude, and he's being unfairly persecuted by the libs. When in reality, it's like, okay, Shane Gillis might have made a mistake, but also, don't fucking use racial slurs in your comedy. And don't be surprised when a network doesn't want to rep the guy who is known for using racial slurs in his comedy. Now, this all sort of came to a head this week when Shane finally hosted SNL, and a clip has been making the rounds of him apparently bombing in his monologue. I personally didn't think it was that bad. You could tell he was nervous. But yeah, a lot of the jokes in it were not funny. And so there are just the most insane tweets from the giga-chads of Twitter claiming that people in the crowd aren't laughing because of wokeness or whatever, going as far as to point out a random member of the band in the back of the SNL stage who wasn't laughing, and is not required to laugh, she's getting paid to play an instrument. And then of course there were a number of the aforementioned giga-chads who decided that free speech has been restored to America because Shane Gillis said the R word in his opening monologue. This is politics now, this is art now, this is all the same thing, and it's insufferable. What's interesting to me here is that Shane Gillis never really rode the I'm being canceled by the woke mob thing. He remains largely apolitical in like a good amount of his comedy. At the end of the day, in my opinion, his jokes in that monologue weren't funny, and I've seen him be funny. So, it's not a sign that something is wrong with our society when people aren't laughing. Bombing is naturally part of stand-up comedy as an art form. Every comedian has done it. And while I feel like Shane Gillis started off with like an audience of middle-of-the-road normies, and then is now slowly gaining a fan base of these alt-right weirdos, I now want to move on and talk about another comedian who started his career by courting an audience of young women, as many young white male stand-up comedians do, only to intentionally pivot to another audience altogether. So brace yourselves. We're gonna talk about Matt Rife. But first, I want to thank Kitsch for sponsoring today's video. Kitsch Rice Water Protein Shampoo and Conditioner Bars are formulated with rice water to help repair damaged hair follicles and prevent split ends. They cleanse and condition your hair and scalp to encourage overall hair length and density. Their solid form is meant to reduce single-use plastic, so they help your hair and the environment as well. I have naturally thick, curly hair, which means that I deal with a whole lot of tangles, mess, breakage, damage, frizz, you name it. I've complained to my hairstylist about it. But using Kitsch bars has helped me strengthen my hair and has changed the overall texture for the better. You can use my link in the description down below or use my code KAYLASAYS to get 25% off of your first order. Kitsch ships in the US and internationally to over 27 countries, and they even have a subscription option for an even better discount. Thank you so much again to Kitsch for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so when this whole controversy blew up, unlike Shane Gillis, I had no idea who the fuck this dude was. But apparently Matt Rife has been trying to get famous for quite some time, and he had an aesthetic glow up in 2022, using probably what is some form of plastic surgery to become very aesthetically appealing for the TikTok generation. He's a hot guy, telling jokes, women like that. And Matt Rife, or at least the people marketing and managing for him, use that fact to their advantage, often posting clips of Rife doing flirty and playful crowd work with women in the audience.
55. Do you remember the first non-pornographic thing that you...
My imagination.
Was it your imagination? What were you thinking about? What was your imagination? What were you thinking of? Was it a teacher at school? Was it a celebrity crush?
It was.
It was a teacher at school? I hope he wasn't having the same dream. Wow.
Rife rode this shtick all the way up to his very own Netflix special, in which he completely flipped the script, setting the tone for the entire special with a domestic violence joke.
And the hostess who seats you at the restaurant had a black eye. A full black eye. And it wasn't like, what happened? Yeah, it was pretty obvious what happened. And my boy who I was with was like, yeah, I feel bad for her, man. I feel like they should put her in the kitchen or something where nobody has to see her face, And I was like, yeah, but I feel like if she could cook, she wouldn't have that black eye.
Aside from the fact that this joke is not funny, it was very obvious that Matt Rife had courted a particular audience of women to get him to the point where he is at now, only to turn that entire grift on its head so that he could be one of the boys. If you asked the average guy like a year and a half ago who Matt Rife is, they'd be like, oh, he's the comedian that girls like with the jawline. But now, he's this super funny, edgy, cool, misunderstood guy getting canceled by the woke mob. He's choosing not to apologize to any of the fans he may have offended, and he's being interviewed by Jordan Peterson of all people. The grift, unfortunately, worked way too perfectly. Because if your comedy is gonna be politicized anyway, you might as well make some money doing it, I guess. And here's the thing, I don't necessarily have a problem with edgy comedy as long as it's not bordering on just being fucking racist or making jokes about beating women. There are smart ways that comedians from those backgrounds with those experiences have tackled those topics. But Matt Rife shit, straight up is not funny. And the craziest thing to me is that these comedians and people in their orbit always love to claim that cancel culture is the worst thing to ever happen to comedy, that we're ruining people's lives and careers over jokes. Meanwhile, Matt Rife is the most successful that he has ever been. Not to go back to Chappelle, but Netflix just keeps dumping money at him, just throwing all kinds of money his way. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more comedians do the Matt Rife style grift in the future, just because it clearly has worked so well for him. Because now, he has a legitimate fan base of girls and guys who will like ride or die for him. He's their favorite comedian, he's out there speaking the truth, and it's just insane to me how easy it is to assign a narrative to someone in a profession like stand-up comedy. Everyone takes this shit so seriously all the time. Sure, in America, Matt Rife has the ability to tell jokes of whatever topic and wherever he pleases at whatever time. And I, just like you, have the right to say, hey, that shit's not funny. The last thing I want to talk about here is sort of the parasocial aspect of stand-up comedy, where people get really attached to stand-up comedians, often filtering their politics through them, as if it's like a badge of honor that you're standing somebody completely unproblematic, only for them to turn around and exhibit behavior in their personal life that you might not necessarily like. And I'm talking about John Mulaney and Bo Burnham. We're going to talk about John Mulaney and Bo Burnham now. Okay, so I can give more of an informed perspective here because I'm actually a fan of these two comedians. I guess I'll start with John Mulaney first, because in like 2016, every woman in like my demographic was obsessed with him. He was like the perfect, unproblematic cinnamon bun guy, making jokes about his wife who's out of his league and his ugly dog. And you know, Mulaney rode that persona all the way to the bank for a while, until it was revealed that he was a completely different person behind the scenes. He got a divorce from his wife and then started a relationship with actress Olivia Munn, who he then had a child with, which was, you know, the equivalent of the end of the world on Gen Z white woman Twitter, which then sparked a conversation about the harm in parasocial relationships, because at the end of the day, while John Mulaney is telling comedic stories about his personal life, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know him personally. He never asked to be the role model for the world, he only ever has been a comedian. Similarly, Mulaney has also recently opened up about his struggle with addiction in his latest comedy special, Baby J. And I found Baby J to be a really refreshing and honest look at a personal struggle with addiction. Mulaney owns up to a lot of his shortcomings as a person. At some points it's really raw, really uncomfortable, but it's still really funny. Now on the flip side of this, everybody has their own proverbial line in the sand when it comes to comedians or artists or musicians that they really like. 2 years ago, John Mulaney let Dave Chappelle open up for him at a show and make problematic transphobic jokes. And again, I'm not saying Dave Chappelle doesn't have a right to tell those jokes, but I have a right to personally not find them funny and to in fact find them harmful. And so therefore, I fuck with John Mulaney a little less than I did in 2016. That personal line for you might be different than for somebody else. You see why this is such a hard conversation to have? Because it's like, so much of the modern day stand-up comedy landscape is wrapped up in politics whether we want to admit it or not. And you know, something simple as enjoying a person's jokes then has to become a declaration, or rather a reflection on you as a person, where you stand on every hypothetical political issue there is. And on that note, we have to talk about the last white male comedian piece of the puzzle here, because I feel like all of this discourse has really gotten to him over the years. Now, I am a big Bo Burnham fan. I've been a Bo Burnham fan since I was in like the 6th grade. And after following his career trajectory over the years, I can confidently say that at least on some level, I think Bo Burnham really resents the art form that made him famous, and has become known for putting that type of resentment into words in his actual work. The most prominent example of this is of course his most recent Netflix project, Inside, which is a comedy special that was produced during the pandemic. I've been meaning to go back and sort of do a retrospective on it. I haven't actually watched the full thing since 2021 when it came out, and I was at a very different place in my life. But you know, it's a very existential piece of comedic work. Bo makes social commentary about the world around us. He talks about politics, about social media, and he also reflects on his past actions, because if you are unaware, Bo Burnham got famous when he was like 17 years old, and so some of his humor has not aged the best over time. He addresses this specifically in a song called Problematic, in which he explains that his suburban upbringing was influenced by problematic humor like Family Guy, and that he did things that he didn't know were problematic at the time, like the example he uses is dressing up as Aladdin when he was 17. And then he uses the second verse to commentate on how the first verse is actually incorrect in its ideology, because even though his upbringing could be used to just explain away his previous problematic behavior, that's no excuse, and at the end of the day, his actions are his own. Some people have found this song in particular to be a little bit self-flagellating and pretentious, but I do think at the very least it is an interesting commentary on the cycle and how it repeats with this type of thing, especially in regards to comedians. They get caught saying an offensive joke X amount of years ago, and the reasoning they usually give is that, you know, it was okay at the time, it was a different sort of culture back then, I'm only informed by my experiences, and that was okay in the community and town that I grew up in. And this song takes a look at that line of thinking and says, yeah, okay, but how are you gonna be better? Do you want to be better? Or do you just want the internet to get off your back? And I feel like, in regards to stand-up comedy and other art forms as well, that's what a lot of the modern day cancel culture discussion boils down to. If you make a mistake, are you actually interested in learning from it? Are you interested personally in being better? Not because it makes you look good, but because there are real life people you've harmed with your actions or your words. And I think with stand-up comedians in particular, the internet has put more pressure on all of them collectively to answer these questions, when a lot of them just want to make money telling jokes. And to tie it back to the whole, plight of the white male comedian thing, of course, these guys are never gonna really suffer any real repercussions for any mistakes they actually make. I mean, the whole origin of this video is that Shane Gillis got to host SNL after essentially being fired from SNL for making problematic jokes. Matt Rife is at the height of his popularity and is probably going to get even more popular. If anything, John Mulaney and Bo Burnham have lost the most amount of fans collectively. People are mad at Mulaney about the Olivia Munn thing, and people are mad at Bo Burnham because Phoebe Bridgers broke up with Paul Mescal and is dating him now, and that shit's just so fucking stupid. That's all for me today, you guys. I have a video coming out about Wicked, the musical and the movie, later this week, so stay tuned for that. My question today is less of a question, but more of a recommendation. Recommend a comedian to me. Here's mine. If you haven't watched Gerard Carmichael, go watch his stuff. It's really good. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.